Hey, Comics Cubers. I am very honored today because my guest is Emiliana Kampilan, otherwise known as Dead Balagtas. Dead Balagtas has created, in my opinion, some of the greatest comics, at least one of the greatest comics that I've ever read, called Dead Balagtas Tomo 1, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa, the dance of the ocean or the sea and the earth. It is landscape format. I will take you through it actually before we interview her. And while we're talking to her, I will also be spotlighting the book. This was an absolute pleasure to do. We talk about politics, the political implications of comics, how your choices are informed by your political thoughts and the way you approach life. This is a little bit of a different type of interview because I do not ask, or I tried not to ask Dead Balagtas any personal questions. You will notice that she wears a bayong. Nobody really knows who she is. To respect her privacy, I did my very best to just ask about the process and the comics that she makes. So without further ado, let's take a look at Dead Balagtas Tomo 1, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa, and then let's talk to Dead Balagtas, Emiliana Kampilan. Dead Balagtas, Emiliana Kampilan, got her start in webcomics in 2013. I discovered her work primarily through this book, Dead Balagtas Tomo 1, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa. That translates to Dead Balagtas Volume 1, The Dance of the Sea and the Earth. However, before I take a look at that, I'm just going to take a look at these three first. These are three anthologies that all feature the work of Dead Balagtas in chronological order. Over here, we have the 2019 Community, which is published by Comiket. It is LGBTQ themed, and she has the first story in here called Pula ang unang kulay ng bahaghari. Red is the first color of the rainbow. And it involves a couple where one of the women leaves town to go and fight for the rebels. So that's a much deeper look into the politics of the Philippines than I have time for here on the show. However, that kind of colors the theme for a lot of Dead Balagtas' works. This is 10 Years to Save the World. This is an anthology about climate change. As you can see, one of the contributors is Budgetan and Kadyo Baldissimo with a Tresa story. Some big names here from the Philippine comic scene, such as Manik Sabrera, Kevin Eric Raimundo, and Ren Galeno. All of these, I would say, are some of the best artists and writers in the Philippine comic scene today. There's also UK contingent over here. Emiliana Kampilan, Dead Balagtas, has a story about Malaika called We Malaika, I the People. It is intensely research heavy, and it's historical as well. So that's it. You can see it here. You can see the type of works that Emiliana does. Very, very heavily influenced by political messaging and the kind of thing that has a lot of call to action. And over here, released last year, is Gigil, a sapphic anthology released by Comiket. All of these are released, or at least co-released by Comiket, and full of short stories. And Emiliana did the very last one here, called Abogada de Campanilla. So it is a law case, it is a legal case, and this one is more of a comedy about a lawyer who is extremely attracted to the judge presiding over her case. Okay, however, we are here primarily to talk about this book, Dead Balagtas Tomo 1, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa. Now, Dead Balagtas Tomo 1, Mga Sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa, you can see here, it starts, it invites you to cut out and make a bookmark using baybayin, actually. And here's a little dedication to me. And there are 4 parts to this comic. The first one is a retelling of the creation myth of the Philippines, or one of the creation myths of the Philippines, si Tungkong Langit at Laon Sina. And you can see here the waves of creation. This book is just insanely beautiful. And the second story is about a couple of friends who grow up together but then grow apart, named Jonoel and Danica. So the thing is, if you can see, they're standing on earth formations, because at the same time that Emiliana is telling us these short stories, she is actually also telling us the geological history of the Philippines. And you can see here in the footnotes, giving you the the background between things like convection currents and slab pulls, tectonic shifts, if you were. As we keep going, we also see here another short story, that one of Ramon and Raman, two men who fall in love. One is Muslim and one is not. So this is the Philippines. You can primarily assume that he's Catholic. And you can just see here the color palette that she's using, and some of the great design work that Emiliana does. And the final story is the story of Anais and Dylan. So Dylan is an activist, and Anais is a service worker who falls in love with Dylan, basically, after going to one of her lectures. You can see the water here as it continues to rise. This is just such a beautiful book, and I am so happy to be able to talk to Dead Balagtas, to be able to show you guys just how beautiful this book is, and to take you guys through her thought process, and in general her creative process as to how she put the book together. I have one question I ask to everyone who comes onto the Comics Cube for the first time, which is, why do you love comics?
I love comics because for me it mixes all forms of communication in order to tell a story. So it really is, for me at least, the purest form of storytelling with the least amount of technology involved. It combines visual, it combines sound, it combines words, it just combines everything, and it does it in this subliminal manner that everything is harmonized in your head. Once you read the page, you get everything, and naintindihan mo agad. And that's just the beauty of it. There's no media like it's been present since millennia, and I think it's one piece of media that's here to stay with us forever.
Do you remember kung kailan ka na in love sa comics?
Oh, yeah. Ano, bata pa ako, mahilig na ako magbasa ng comics. Noong araw parang napakalumang panahon mo. Noong araw, nagbabasa ako ng mga funny comics.
Yeah.
Ito yung mga talagang comics sa hanto na binibili pa. How much was it for penny? Piso-piso lang siya,
Piso-piso.
barya lang siya din.
Yeah.
Kaya mura lang yung funny comics eh. Tapos favorite ko noon si Oliver Page. Siya yung author ng Tomas at Kulas. Tapos hindi lang gumagana yung utak ngayon, pero ang pangalan yung gumawa ng Petit. Mahilig din ako sa newspaper strips. Paborito ko si Pupong ni
Yeah.
Young Stone, and si Baltic and Company is one of my favorite long time running comic strips in Filipino newspapers. So I read a lot of comics when I was a kid.
Okay.
Even yung mga Batman, Superman, yeah, I read a lot of it. Kasi yung lolo ko din, mahilig siya sa comics. Si Ken Koy, Not Only the Last List. They saw it really early on because they were able to preserve some of their old magazines. Pero we were in post-war, and then I picked up on little ones. Ayun. Started at a very young age talaga.
And then when did you start writing and when did you start drawing? And then when did you decide na, uy, pwede pala silang i-combine?
I wasn't really that much of a writer. Uh, I wasn't the sort of person who went out and wrote my own stories. Um, I my course pa nga is actually from a very technical background. But I've started writing and drawing comics in college, I think, for my first, second year. And I was a member of Gabriela kasi ako dati. Gabyut ako sa UP. These were comics for dissemination talaga. These were infographics. They were strips. They were more or less strips. And actually about the Visiting Forces Act back then. Yun yung mga comics na ginagawa ko araw. So a lot of them were for org work, political comics. So that's my first actual comics work, as I say. And then later I decided to do strips of my own. That's around 2014, I think.
Mhm.
And so that's how Dead Balagtas started. With basically just that.
Actually, I was just browsing your Facebook and scrolled all the way back down to the very first one. And
Oh my God, nakakahiya.
and
No.
it's dated August 2013.
2013, I can't even, hindi ko natatandaan yung dates. But thank you for reminding me.
It's
I don't
okay.
look at those old scripts na eh. They're embarrassing insofar as I'm concerned. They're like aborted children.
And
I
nandyan pa
just don't
eh.
want to look at Actually, ko na delete yung page because the funniest thing is I'm locked out of my own Facebook account.
Really?
Yes. Yes, I'm locked out of my own Facebook account. So that page is not working right now.
That's true.
But it's yeah, it's linked to my old phone because you know the thing with smartphones, you have to keep changing them. Yeah. But yeah,
It's
thank
true.
you for reminding me.
Your last post on it is July of last year, 2024, when you were publishing your entry in Gigil.
Yeah, I promoted it.
And then after that you changed your phone. Okay.
Yeah.
This is interesting to me
One plus.
because the comics that you mentioned that you read growing up are mostly humor comics. But obviously your comics have a very very political bent and a very very socially relevant bent. So why what made you realize that comics, aside from everything you mentioned earlier about why you love comics, but what made you realize comics are the best medium for that kind of message?
Ano ko kasi, ang take ko sa big position is the people don't like being preached to. We're very individualistic as a species. And the thing with politics is mahirap mang kumbinse kapag people come with a set of beliefs na, diba? Tapos babanggain mo ng bagong set of beliefs. Diba? That's how they're informed about something, but you're essentially telling them, but you're missing something. You're missing a part of the story. Here's what you should know. That's the sell when it comes to political comics. So my view on this is because people don't like being preached. It's really best when we come to realize concepts and things by ourselves. Yung mula sa sarili natin, just this eureka moment. That's really when it comes together. Comics gives that space to people. It gives them that quiet place to just read. And all these words, I mean, I guess people read differently. But for me, this comes from personal experience, but I would hazard a guess that other people are like this as well. When we read comics, we can hear the words, right? We can hear dialogue. We have our own voice for how one character speaks. And when there's onomatopoeia, and I really like working with onomatopoeia, we hear it in our heads. There's an explosion, you see an explosion illustrated and with the usual visual language of a boom thing.
Mhm.
You understand, you can hear the noise in your head. So it's you. It's really just the reader putting things together in their, and when they put things, elements of a scene in their head, they're also putting together elements of this in their head, and as well as the meanings behind them. And so that's when I figured that this is good. The entire structure of comics can be used to break down concepts and make suggestions, if not inform the reader. And they come to it just by reading. And this was because of the subliminal nature of the visual language pismo. Really, it doesn't need explaining. It doesn't need explaining. And then they immediately get it. So yeah, that's how I realized comics can be used or a huge political tool there. Have a lot of political power.
I think you're right in that sense, no? Kasi one of the leading theories behind comics is the idea that the power of comics is actually in the gutters, in the spaces between panels, because it forces the reader to work to fill in the gaps in between those panels, which to
Yeah.
your point is like forcing the reader to project themselves into the characters and the narration and the sounds.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's also my favorite medium.
Yeah, with comics is great talaga. Grabe. This the power talaga of every element. And that's why I really love yung hinihima yung every element of it, just the gutters, just the margins then, what's pushed aside, why is the dialogue the focus, why is this the shot? That's my favorite aspect of it. And I think there are a lot of the Vertigo comics back then, they just really push the genre. I'm glad to have grown up then and read a lot of it.
That's actually the segue to my next question, which is when you're making comics, putting it together structurally, as well as in terms of how you illustrate it. What comics and which artists and creators have influenced you the most?
Oh, this I often have trouble answering this because while I do have some general favorites, I think that when we write or when we make comics, it's the same with it's the same with putting together an opera or making a film. Except the challenge is you're just one person, and usually for film and opera, these are group projects of sort. You work with a team, but with comics, it's really just the comic creator or director, or often in the Philippines, it's just the comic. The comic creator is both the writer and the artist.
Mhm.
So it depends on the message that we're going to tell. Really depends on the story that we want to. Um, I I often look at works before me when works already made because this is really important. I look at the history of these things that I want to talk about and see similar works. Parang gumagawa ng RRN, review related literature. And then I see what works, what's already been done, so that I don't replicate it. Or if ever I'm going to pay tribute to it, I really have to do it properly. So, for instance, um, with volume one, with Tomo one,
Yeah.
um, yeah, with Tomo one, there was it's a lot of not just comics kasi involved in this. There's a lot of research into hobby, yung batiks, uh, hablon patterns. So that was a lot of the influence. Um, and then back then I think you used to see Kate Beaton, and
Yeah.
admittedly, the works for the first strips, they were just historical fun strips, but I really wanted to do something there. And so I did study her work and see, parang, this is great, but this isn't what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you recognize just what she's done. So that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of historical manga by shoujo ito si Ryoko Ikeda, the author of Banner Rose Per Side. Um, so I also tend to look at her work. I'm quite fond of shoujo. Perhaps it's because during the 90s there's a lot of shoujo influence in manga for women, for girls. So I also look at her pattern and I see what works, I see what doesn't. So you just have to look at works done before. I also really like yung paneling ni Tezuka.
Yeah.
Um, Actually, Miller's Electra is also great. Eh. Um, Sino pa ba?
Yeah.
Si,
These are all great comics.
yeah, those are really great comics. Eh.
And
Si, oh, the last.
I will say,
Yeah,
Hark a Vagrant by Kate Beaton. I wasn't thinking of it, but as now that I'm looking at
yeah,
your older stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, I
yeah,
see
di
it.
ba?
I totally see it.
Yeah, there was, yeah, this was what was in then, and it coincides. It coincides then with what the time that she was making it, because I think this was the era then when Tumblr was a big thing.
Yeah,
And there was this Tumblr website called Historical Crushes. So there's a lot of, I
I
think
remember.
Tumblr gave a voice to a lot. Yeah, diba? There were a lot of nerds. A lot of nerds were validated by Tumblr, and so that gets me thinking. Oh, since I love history and I think I can draw somehow, passable naman do kung ano kaya kong gawin. Might as well try my hands on this. That's what I decided to do.
You talked about what inspired you to create Dead Balagtas, but how did you end up bringing that concept to life?
That Tomo 1,
Yeah,
Tomo,
Tomo one.
for Tomo 1.
How did?
Well, Adarna, initially with that as a group, Adarna wanted to publish just the strips, but ayun nga, I think that this has been done before, like I said, it's basically just an educational comic strip with, excuse me, it's just comic strips that are funny and that have educational tidbits. It's been done. And I wanted to do something that starts from the very beginning. Parang si Maria lang sa Dore Nila. So that's when I decided to start with the Big Bang from the perspective of the Babaylands and the creation of the island. So that's the entirety of Tomo 1. It's just figuring out a way to talk about the Big Bang and geography, and at the same time talk about Philippine creation myths. Use everything in such a way that isn't an
Mm-hmm.
archaic or doesn't or hasn't been done before, but using modern stories, more relevant modern themes. So that's how I came up with Tomo 1. There's supposed to be a Tomo 2, but uh, I'm not sure when I'll be able to have enough time and energy for this.
Here's what blew me away about Tomo 1. First of all, I pick it up. It's landscape format. There's not a lot of landscape books out there, although there are more and more coming out now. And then I open it, and the first thing that you see, one of those things where you're supposed to cut it out and you're going to build something. So
Yeah.
automatically, it's inviting you to play with it. And then I turn the page to see one of the creation myths of the Philippines, which is Tungkong Langit and La Uncina, and it's just some of the most amazing design work that I've ever seen in a comic. And it's helped by the fact that it is a landscape book, and you're double page spreading this in a landscape, so it looks wider than usual. Followed by
Yeah.
three short stories of three pairs of people who in various types of relationships that are at the same time paralleled by by the story of the geological creation of the Philippines. How in the world did you even begin to structure this book?
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, thanks for the kind words. Yeah. A lot of the good stuff about it can be attributed to um the local beavers, to Hablon Beaver, as I mentioned. Because this is mm, it's a common theme in history naman that everything flows. The flow, history, time flows. So I was really looking for a way to physically capture that, the feel din of Hablon. So, because yun yung Hablon eh, bahaba siya eh, talaga. You know, yung mga local booster, they flow. They're usually geometric patterns that just they flow. And so I figured that a landscape, layout would be the best way to capture that, and as well as just how wide the expanse of the universe and the continents are. Um, the intent was really that while flipping the book, there's a flow, not just in terms of reading, it's supposed to guide the eyes then, but also because of the water panels, they're supposed to flow. So there's a flow invented there, which in the first panel, yeah, which in the first chapter, um, it the first chapter is really supposed to be like the guide for most of how the stories work. I was hoping with Tomo and that I would lay out some principles of paneling that I'm still trying to conceptualize. Yeah, so that's how the first volume came about. Because of just studying a bunch of reading patterns. Um, Seeing what works. As for the bookmark, yeah, because during this time, and I know now there's a lot of baybayin, baybayin and surat, Bisaya comics. There's a lot of comics that utilize this now. But back then, we were still figuring out how onomatopoeia for Philippine comics works. So I decided to try to integrate reading baybayin with using that book. I really like origami. I like playing with stuff. And it must be a girl thing, and we buy these cutout dolls as a kid. Yung dadamitan mo. So it comes from that. It comes from that. I like cutting things.
It's a
And
it's a
I do
playfulness.
invite the
Yeah.
yeah. I like interactive works. Pop-up books. I love them. Yeah, those are big inspo din, yung mga pop-up books. They're great. They're great.
So when you're coming up, let's just talk about the intro now, the creation myth. So you talk about it being in waves. Does that does the image come first before you telling the story, or do you already know? Do you already have the script, and then you come up with the visualizations?
Okay. For the first chapter, it's really an adaptation of this chronicle by Alcina. I think it's Alcina who recorded it. So
Okay.
there was this, diba, we really used it even yung mga Odoy, that's the umpisak usual chant nila. So this is just the script. Oh, I think this is just the text, the myth, with some tweaks, just so that it could fit in as script for the comics. Um, and you work with that script and you wonder, well, how is this going to flow in a page in such a way that people follow, si Tungkulani making things while his wife stands in the background watching. So yeah, that's the skin for this. Our techniques really vary on what we're trying to tell. So for here, we as we need to follow the script. We need to make the script work. So it's a script, and then the images are they follow later. So the paneling which needs to work with the script. And of course, when we panel, we also include the image na rin na. Um, for the second chapter, uh, there was a
With
script. I usually
yeah.
work with a whole story na, and then the script it's done around 60%. And then we just minsan kasi because of time constraints, I have to just write it along later. But it, the important part for me really is paneling everything properly in the frames, the story. So yeah, before ako mag-drawing well, no, I'm confused na rin with my own method. Usually, usually kasi pag nag-panel ako, may image na rin. Parang
Ah,
what is the optimal way to show this? So, using this theory, and this theory. So, yeah. So ayun. Supposed to come together that. Talagang, the paneling is what's really important to me.
the three stories after the creation myth in Tomo 1, mga sayaw ng Dagat at Lupa, are about three pairs of people. The first one is about two kids who grow up together named Danica and John Noel, and grow apart. And the second one
Mhm.
is two men who fall in love, si Ramon and si Raman, which made me laugh. And then
Yeah.
the third one is two women who fall in love, named Anais and Dylan.
Mhm.
So again, as I mentioned, you at the same time you tell these three stories, you talk about you also visualize the geological creation of the Philippines. So when you're creating these slice of life stories, um, does the story come first, or is that dictated by the geological progression of the Philippines? Like magagalit si Raman when, and then the waves will come up, or
Yeah.
how's that work?
Mhm. The stories are just explanations. They're kumbaga, because this is a creation. This isn't creation. Grabe, creation Bible agad. My God, sorry. This is a geology. This is a geology book. But it's supposed to be disguised. It's supposed to be disguised. So tama. They're all tectonic and sea plates, and at the same time they can be people. Or they can just be tectonic plates, or they can just be people. It really depends on what the reader wants them to be. So it really invites the reader's intervention to get what they want. But of course, personally, I would read the last everything all at once. Um, so since what we're doing is really trying to explain each geological phenomena using a different language. So for instance, si Raman at si Ramon, uh, they don't progress any further, or at least that's not shown in chapter 3. Because if they had progressed any further, well, hindi magkakaroon ng siege. Hindi magkakaroon ng Dagat. So it ends there. It ends with them dating. And si first part naman, of course, they're going to break up because it's about continental drift. So it's just an explanation of geological formulas and creative as it sounds. There's a challenge in that, in finding a creative way which integrates our old myths and wave storytelling into explaining scientific phenomena. And because really, that's why in the first chapter there's a babaylan telling it. Because yun
Yes.
yung pananaw din ng mga babaylan. But if you read our local myths and stories, yung si Daragang Magayon, the volcano is a woman. Si si Sinukuan, si Makiling, they're mountains. So a lot of geological phenomena, it's the same for a lot of Austronesian people, is explained as is personified, or
Mhm.
rather, maybe that's not even the proper concept for it, but explained in such a way that they are actual, these people, they're actual living beings, and this phenomena has a, and geological phenomena has a personal and emotional aspect. So that was what I was also aiming for in writing Toho 1. And there's a thing with the paneling of those three chapters then is that with the continental drift chapter, the first chapter has almost formlessness, right?
Yes.
It's just one straight leaf to illustrate also the Big Bang. So even the paneling should be thematic.
Mhm.
And then it changes into this very straight box, which are broken apart bit by bit as the story progresses because the continents they're growth. And then you go to the sea chapter, and then it starts flowing until the fourth chapter starts really breaking apart. Because you have to illustrate just how much tectonic shift happens throughout the ages. So the writing, the paneling, it needs to go hand in hand with the story we're trying to tell, which is at its core the creation of the Philippine Islands.
And when you wrote those stories as well, I will say that every individual story had emotional resonance. So how do
Mm.
you balance out scientific fact, um, emotional resonance, and
Mhm.
historical? I don't want to say revisionism. Revisionism is the wrong word. Historical critique, maybe, and
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
and in some cases as well a political message.
Yeah. But we there's a conscious effort talaga to make it interesting. But of course, I recognize that when I say to make it interesting, it it's subjective. Parang what interests me may not necessarily be interesting to other people. But because that was the intent in making them different genres, but were united together by the common element of love. At this, again, because throwback to the Tungkol Langit and Daon Sina, which is this divorce, this is whole love story turned into a sacred divorce. Um, that's that's why we tried. I really tried using different genres. So with the gay guys, it's rom-com, and with the fourth one, it was a sort of melodrama, and with the first one, I think it was also a sort of melodrama. I was also trying to see what was clicking with some of them are not necessarily my interest, for instance. Admittedly, I wasn't much of a gamer, but I know a lot of gamers. So I did try to integrate them into story. And the third one is the last one is a lot of it's political. As for the second one, I decided to use religion as a theme, uh, because without without spoiling too much or over explaining, these two very different seatmates, they needed to find common ground. They
Yeah.
needed to collide at some point. And that's why they start talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, because it's a meeting point for the Judeo-Christian and Muslim religions. We all, they're all homophobic together. They're united in the homophobia in terms of Sodom and Gomorrah. It's present in these stories. Although, of course, there are different interpretations, but Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, as well as the other sects of these three religions. Sodom and Gomorrah becomes a story to disown the gays, to disown the LGBT community. So that's our common ground. But at the same time, it's also we're dig up for different religions. So I think that it was an apt metaphor for them meeting at something. So it's just finding how to make it interesting. So try to find a common metaphor that people understand or people can at the very least relate to or have some familiarity with. When we try to make these geological phenomena, the explanations for this geological phenomena interest, although science is, I would argue, interesting by itself,
Mhm.
by exploring different ways in which these phenomena can be expressed using familiar terminology, familiar themes, which are close to the heart of people or familiar, um, or unknown at the very least, and to just work with it. That's how I came up with it. And I also had a bunch of Muslim friends who were very helpful in
Yeah.
writing this. Yeah, that's how I came up with those two stories.
Your work, Tomo One, covers the geological creation of the Philippines as well as a different slice of life stories in it, creation myths, and all of that. But you were working on it at a very tumultuous time in Philippine history. Um, Regardless of when you set a story and when you set a particular work, you cannot possibly help but be influenced by what's going on around you. So how did all of that inform everything, and how, frankly, how is it informing your work now?
Mhm. Oh, there's a lot of class politics in Tongulan, especially I think in the last chapter I did my best to um make even the panel political in its own way. a lot of the gutters were used in order to make suggestions about the effects of marginalization and how suggest ways in which one can overcome these structural, to put it mildly, these these structural inhibitions that prevent people, working class people, from getting what they need. So how right now, how does it inform my present work now? Well, right, my last one was Abogado de Campanilla.
Yeah.
So right now, to be honest, I'm really not working on anything. If you ask me when was the last time I drew, that was when I made that comic. It's been that long. I haven't drawn, I haven't picked up the pen for the longest period. Um, but for Abogado de Campanilla, comic, it's I back then I really just decided kasi to just pick something that's close to the heart. I didn't really write or set out to write anything political about that. But with regards to other works, for instance, there's I did this anthology called Gigil but from Dental. It's published by Dental. But the intent really is at all times, even though the politics isn't so obvious or is much more latent, such as in Abogado de Campanilla. I really do my best to make it so that the gaze is a subverting sort of gaze, in that it places marginalized persons in positions of power. The focus is on those who are, you know, nasa laylayan ng lipunan, if you can use that word, and in such a way that, without over-explaining again, liberation of the person from oppressive structures is suggested and eventually achieved in, if not in the story, then in the panels. So that's how I try to integrate politics in the work. Again, I focus a lot on paneling. So the panelings are supposed to show that.
With
I
the,
would always advocate for paneling being a political thing. That's that's what I hope to achieve in my comments.
so when you say paneling is a political thing, you mean, can you elaborate on that some more?
Oh, sure. Yeah, ano kasi, a lot of it has to be seen in, but paneling involves a great deal of, I would say, visual dialectics. May pagtatalo lagi when one panels. It first begins with the comicero, with the comic creator. What should be drawn here? Who should be the focus of this panel and why? So you sort that out in your head. And it begins with that. Then you just hope, because you can't do again. Comics is a two-way street. The reader and the comicero, they have to come together. So the comicero can only really suggest. We can only make suggestions. And so you always say, there's no actual movement in comics. We can only make suggestions of movement. There's no actual sound. There's only suggestions of sound. But that's the beauty of it. It is in the reader understanding and accepting those suggestions of a certain eureka moment first. So it's a very political thing. Because in just focusing on a subject matter in one panel, you can already make suggestions to the reader. And what more in sequences of panels? There's this panel in Tomo 1 that I actually like to sa pinuri ko yung sarili ko, pasensya na. Not to toot on my own horn. But it's an actual batik. I like it because there's a batik pattern involved in which the Quran falls and then
Yeah, I know that
Hiraman,
one.
yung Muslim guy. Yeah, there's this Muslim guy, and it coincidentally, although of course, could be a coincidence or it could be Allah actually doing it, answering his question, answering his doubt. It opens into this surah, and then the surah opens, there's that text, and then it suddenly opens up into him being in a in a fetal position, para siyang bata, being cradled by this bird motif, which bears the name of Allah. So that's this is sort of paneling that I like. It also strives to, I mean, make suggestions to it to the reader who will read the comic. Um, it also takes into consideration the Muslim perspective and uses that perspective rather than a a a non-religious perspective in order to show this. Because and we decided to also use the surah itself, voice of the actual person, the Quran, to answer him. Again, this is another conscious decision. The paneling that follows that scene in which the Quran drops to the floor, very um, medyo delikado yun eh, kasi nahulog it's just like the word of God, pero it opens up to the word of God that answers him. Another conscious decision to panel it in such a way that the Muslim point of view, the Muslim message becomes the focus about his sexuality because he's a Maranao character.
Mhm.
And so kailangan ang manaigtin is yung pananaw at perspektibo niya rather than trying to cater to a non-Maranao reader. And the reader is then, I wouldn't say forced, but the
Invited.
suggestion is for the reader to understand, to understand where this person and to get it, to find common ground with the character. So that sort of paneling is to be very political.
Can you talk to me about how you use color? Because it's a really interesting way to use color. You don't use it in a very common way. You highlight reds and you highlight blues, and obviously those are the colors of the Philippine flag. But what was the impetus to basically use those colors as opposed to just coloring it straightforward?
Mm. Yeah, the red and the blue are these are contrasting colors. They suggest conflict. It suggests that especially in the fourth chapter, I think the reds and the blues, the conflict between these two colors, they're much more highlighted because the intent then in the third chapter was because they're going to come together na in making peace with their sexuality. It's much more soothing. It's much more soothing palette, except in those scenes in which the two characters are really being forced or going through the small and going through all these suggestions of to going through all these images which condition people to be heterosexual. These ads behind them, everywhere surrounding them. And they're colored differently, they're contrasted with suggests that they stand in conflict against what's happening in their background. In the final chapter, the reds and the blues are really contrasted together to suggest conflict about in Philippine society. And with, of course, the red usually winning over the blue to suggest the importance of class struggle. The flesh tones, I decided to paint it gray. Again, another political choice because I'm not sure if it's matulog pa rin siya ngayon, pero especially back, there was a lot of issues on skin color.
Yes, I remember.
Issue kung, yung color, mga talaga, parang, the issue really was that, ano ba talaga yung, diba, totoo din naman, may mestiza domination sa Philippine cinema. So, merong mga nag-aano na morena, mga totoo. Pilipina ganyan. I don't believe that. I don't buy that. That's Aryan. That's Nazi sounding. The whole thing that our race is dictated by our skin color, or ethnicity, Philippine ethnicity is dictated by skin color. It's ridiculous. So lahat sila Filipino. So I decided to use a gray tone kasi it also pays tribute to our history na madami tayong mestiza, madaming Chinoy, madaming mga may Portuguese blood. There's a variety of Filipino skin tones. Hindi lang yan sa pagkamoreno. It's so, I'm brown myself, but my goodness, I really don't, sorry. I'm very, I'm very averse to that Nazi sounding na parang kailangan moreno, kailangan brown. Rizal wasn't probably that dark skinned, to be
I get
honest.
you.
Yeah, she get Chinoy blood sa mestizo. So again, they're gray. There's a particular shade of gray in order to stamp in the na Filipino sila. They're not going to make this a skin color issue. Lahat sila Filipino. And the focus is going to be on the conflict happening around it, which is suggested by the reds and blues. That's why, aside from between the colors of Philippine black, yeah, the red and blues are utilized in a way to highlight societal conflict. When is the agent, that is the characters, going against the structure? When is a breakthrough from the structure going to happen? Yeah, that's how I decided to go with it.
It's an interesting thing, the skin color thing, because I do remember a very controversial optical store billboard at around the same time. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember that. Okay, okay. And also,
yeah.
I think there's a double standard because I am brown skinned, and I have had girls who have lighter skin than me tell me that I'm maputi, and buti pa ako, maputi ako. And I'm like, and then
Oh my
we put our arms together, and I'm like, I am literally darker than you. That makes no sense, right?
yeah,
Uh,
people skin tones are
and also,
I'm going to make comments that will get me canceled pa ganyan eh. Kaya,
it's okay. Nobody knows who you are. So, uh, Emiliana, I think honestly, I said it at the top of the show. I do think that if Tomo One is all you ever did, then you would still go down as one of the best Filipino comiceros to ever do it. I do think it is. I do think it is of a very high level. I think that there's a lot of technique and thought and craft put into the book. Notably, all of your works that I have read, I might be wrong, I don't know. Although all of your works are in Tagalog, and this is an interesting thing for me because I always wonder what the right language is when you're making a comic in the Philippines. Do you write in Filipino? Which Filipino language do you write in? Do you write in English so that it's more accessible internationally, and then everybody just pretends that it's translated for the reader? Where do you stand on this?
mhm. Well, I'm, I'm, I'm much more inclined to write in Filipino. Um, if I can help it, if I can help it, I will write in Filipino. This is an interesting question because right now I'm actually working on a Babaylan comic and it's set in the 10th century,
Mhm.
more or less. And since this is the 10th century, I'm still deciding on how, well, I've already decided actually, but for the longest time, I think about 1.5 years, was thinking of how should they sound? Because the actual accounts firsthand on what our pre-colonial ancestors sounded. A lot of it is also based on how Spanish chroniclers heard them.
Mhm.
And then if we're going to look at, let's say, the Laguna copper plate, that's also very interesting because it's in Japanese. So there, that was the trade language. But we have surviving artifacts are of the trade language, which is the equivalent of finding a receipt in English ngayon na nagpapakita ng breakdown ng taxes natin. That's enough knowledge of receipt in English. Um, so there's a lot of politics talaga involved in picking which language to write in. And right now, I've chosen just to write in Filipino and to use actually my ano ako dyan. I've decided to use the Bible. I've decided to use biblical Filipino to write scripts for the
Really?
Babaylans. Yeah. Yes. Because it will be much apparent when it comes into God knows when, pero when it comes into ano na, when it comes to when I release it. Because these are I wonder if there I wrote a comic in which was published in Caguana. It's entitled Sisut Lang Dila, tumababay na Sisut Lang Dila. So I'm writing a follow-up story on that, writing a follow-up graphic novel on that. And they use this, they use old speak. It's the same, I think it's the same issue when writing period films for English film. Parang what language should they use? Should they, it's like Eggers talagang, should they use Old English? Pero ganyan yun sa atin eh, ang problema sa Pilipino, maiintindihan ba nila? Because, ayun, there's this issue then that a lot of Filipinos have difficulty reading Filipino na. So what more if we make it archaic and typical Filipino? Pero it would be weirder to hear 10th century women talking to gods na para bang may kausap lang sila sa kanto. So, ayun, sabi ko na lang, you know what? F it. Well, people don't read it. What can we do? But to write it's going to even be weirder kapag para lang si Rupa may hinto yung bagaylan. Para lang siyang, girl, mag-alay ka na si Joel, may matiwata, girl. Lutuin mo na yung puto, tapos i-alay mo na, girl. That's weirder. Or to sacrifice, parang that reverence for this tradition of these women, just so that they can be comprehensible, or I hate to use this word, relatable. That would be an affront. That's why I decided to use biblical Filipino for it. And hopefully later on, because the setting is in Panay, it's just going to be translated into either Kiraya or Ilonggo, another issue altogether, surgery, because there are so many languages and I only have a handful of brain cells working and only have a handful of pesos, so I can't pay to translate this in any other language. So that's a problem pa. I'll share that. Kasi Karaya talaga yung lengguwahe nila. They speak Karaya. Kailan nga lang, mas maraming Ilonggo readers.
Of course.
So if I want to be really read, or if I want it much more disseminated, it should be in Ilonggo.
Yeah.
Kaya nga lang, hindi nakaras. Yun na naman, it's like a chicken and the egg problem for me. If I want to be practical about this, it should be in Ilonggo. But if I want to be much more accurate about this, it should be in Karaya. So, ang question na talaga is, what should be prioritized? Accuracy or practicality? And at the end of, depende na rin din yan, that's in the future. But right now, I'm hoping there will be 2 translations.
Okay.
But the budgetary constraints will really decide on this. Again, my wallet is going to make the final decision.
To be clear, this is not Tomo 2.
No, this is not Tomo. This is not Tomo 2. This is not Tomo 2 yet.
Okay. And it's interesting to me because when it comes to language, the Philippines really does. We go in a hierarchy, you know. It's a colonialist thing. We go in a hierarchy thing because, like, if I'm in Manila, well, historically, I guess it's not true anymore. But if I'm in Manila, tapos all of a sudden I hear somebody speaking in English, social yung taong yun. But then all of a sudden, if I'm in Cebu and I hear somebody talking in Tagalog, social yung taong yun.
Right. Yeah. It's nag-iiba na yung nag-iiba. I noticed din, parang nasa buwan, they prefer na nga talking in English over Filipino.
Yeah. I noticed that too.
Yeah, so they prefer that.
And of course, like, it's changing with the younger generation because even people like at my old workplace, people who don't even really speak English only talk to their kids in English, and it blows my mind. So their kids grow up not speaking Filipino.
Mm-hmm. And that's quite lamentable. Kasi don't you want bilingual children?
Yeah.
A lot of them kasi they plan to migrate. Kaya yung couple of people or hands.
But even if you migrate, diba?
Yeah.
That's your culture. Emiliana, we've been here for an hour, so I just really want to talk about these 3 books behind me really quickly. So these are all anthologies that you take part in. So Gigil is a sapphic anthology where you wrote Abogado de Campanilla. And this is the 2019 community anthology by Comic Cat, where you wrote Pula ang unang kulay ng bahaghari. Red is the first color of the rainbow. And this is your 10 years to save the world, where you wrote about Malaika. So this one is intensely research heavy, and it becomes almost like the story of her battle. No? And this one is about a couple who one of them goes off to fight with the rebels. And then this one is more of a comedy. So
Yeah.
what kind of, I guess, what kind of sentiment or what kind of resonance do you hope that people take out of your work after they have read it?
I think it's hard to suggest something political, but my hope is that my readers can see just how much potential there is in paneling in Filipino comics. There's just so much potential in Filipino paneling. And we have such a rich tradition of literature, of arts and media, where we can derive so many ideas and bases for our panel, which I do strive to do and to use and utilize in all my works, even though they can be the silliest stuff. I try to integrate as much of what I know in works and show just how paneling can be used to tell a story. And that's what I want the readers to take away. There's so much potential to paneling in Philippine comics, and we can make our own tradition of panel.
Okay. And in an anthology, Emiliana, there are two very important positions in an anthology. You're the first and the last. And in all three of these anthologies, you're either the first or you are the last. How do you feel about the fact that your work is clearly super valued in the community?
Oh, well, the first thing that I really feel is nahihiya talaga ako. I'm frank, I think this is no, I'm terrible at taking compliments. I only respond to negative reinforcement. I often joke
Okay.
about that, but nahihiya. I think nahihiya ako, but I'm also really grateful. And honestly, I think some of them is because mabagal akong gawa and nahuli ako magsab. So I'm not sure if that also played a factor. But I am grateful for people who read my work and respect my work. I also have incredible respect for my readers, everyone. Generally.
Thank you so much, Emiliana Kampilan, Dead Balagtas. This was a pleasure. I hope you're okay to come back on the show when you have a new release, if that's okay.
Sure, when that happens, just when that happens. Thanks for having me,
Just
Jen.
let me know. Thank you so much. Maraming salamat.
Thank you.